In the autumn of 1875,
The Arizona Weekly Miner published a brief notice about the discovery of human remains near the abandoned settlement of Copper Ridge, 17 miles northeast of Prescott. The article mentioned that territorial authorities were investigating what appeared to be an old burial site disturbed by seasonal flooding. What the newspaper failed to mention was that this discovery would uncover one of the most calculated and disturbing criminal enterprises in territorial Arizona history, operated by two women who had transformed hospitality into a systematic method of murder. Before we dive into the story, I want you to click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more shocking stories from the American frontier tomorrow. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love connecting with viewers from around the world who share a fascination with these dark chapters of our history. Now, let's continue with the story. The year was 1873, and the Arizona Territory had been carved from the New Mexico Territory just a decade earlier. President Lincoln had signed the Arizona Organic Act in 1863, creating a vast administrative region that stretched from the Colorado River to the Continental Divide. The territory remained largely untamed, with ongoing Apache conflicts under leaders like Cochise and Geronimo making travel dangerous for civilians and military personnel alike. Prescott, established as the territorial capital in 1864, struggled to maintain governance over an area larger than modern-day Italy, with a population scattered across mining camps, military outposts, and trading settlements. The Southern Pacific Railroad had yet to penetrate Arizona, making transportation slow and treacherous. Communication between settlements relied on mounted messengers and the occasional military dispatch, creating isolation that could span weeks between news from the outside world. Federal authority existed primarily through a handful of military installations and a territorial marshal whose jurisdiction covered thousands of square miles with only a small number of deputies. Local law enforcement was sporadic at best, often consisting of appointed sheriffs whose authority extended only as far as their personal influence or the range of their weapons. It was against this backdrop of limited oversight and abundant opportunity that Margaret and Catherine Flanagan established their operation in the settlement of Copper Ridge. According to territorial census records discovered in the Arizona State Archives in 1952, the sisters had appeared in the territory during the spring of 1872, claiming to be widows from Missouri seeking new opportunities in the West. Margaret, the elder at 31, presented herself as a woman of respectable bearing who had lost her husband to consumption. Catherine, 27, was introduced as having been widowed by a mining accident in Colorado before joining her sister in their westward journey. County deed records from Yavapai County show that the sisters purchased a substantial property in Copper Ridge with cash payment, unusual for women traveling without male accompaniment in that era. The transaction, recorded by territorial land agent William Hodges, involved the acquisition of a two-story adobe and timber structure that had previously served as a trading post, along with surrounding acreage that included access to a reliable water source. Hodges noted in his personal journal, later discovered among his effects, that the sisters had paid the asking price without negotiation and had seemed particularly interested in the building's isolation from the main settlement. Copper Ridge itself had been established in 1869 following the discovery of copper deposits in the nearby hills. By 1872, the settlement had grown to include approximately 200 residents, primarily miners working small claims, along with the usual frontier businesses, a general store, blacksmith shop, 2 saloons, and a small church that doubled as a schoolhouse. The community was strategically located along one of the main routes between Prescott and the northern mining districts, making it a natural stopping point for travelers, freight wagons, and official territorial business. The building acquired by the Flanagan sisters had a unique history that would prove significant to their later operations. Originally constructed in 1870 by a German immigrant named Heinrich Müller as a combination trading post and residence, it featured thick adobe walls, reinforced with timber framing, and an unusual design that incorporated the natural hillside into its rear structure. Muller had built the establishment with security in mind, including a root cellar that extended deep into the hillside and thick walls that could withstand both Apache raids and the extreme weather conditions common to the high desert environment. Mueller's death in late 1871 had been officially attributed to a hunting accident, though Deputy Marshal James Morrison noted in his private correspondence that the circumstances had seemed unusual. Morrison wrote to his brother in California, "Found old Heinrich at the bottom of a ravine near his place. Horse came back without him, but the saddle cinch had been cut clean through, not frayed like it would be from wear. Nobody else around to ask questions, so the matter was put to rest quick enough." The property had remained vacant for several months before being acquired by a mining speculator who never occupied it, then sold to the Flanagan sisters at what local residents considered a remarkably low price. Upon taking possession of the property, the sisters immediately undertook extensive renovations that puzzled local observers. They hired workers from Prescott to make structural modifications that seemed unusually specific and secretive. According to carpenter Joseph Mitchell, whose account was recorded by territorial historian Robert Bradley in 1889, the sisters had very particular requests about the modifications they wanted made to the building's interior. They wanted a false wall built in the back room, with a hidden door that you couldn't see unless you knew exactly where to look. Mitchell recalled, said they needed a secure place to store valuables, what with all the rough characters passing through. They also wanted the root cellar expanded and connected to the main building through a covered walkway they said was for weather protection. Paid cash for the work and extra to keep the details private, which wasn't unusual in those parts where folks often had reasons to keep their business to themselves. The renovations took approximately 6 weeks during the summer of 1872, with the sisters staying at a boarding house in Prescott while overseeing the work. Local residents noted that Margaret Flanagan visited the construction site daily, often carrying a leather-bound notebook in which she made detailed sketches and measurements. Catherine was observed less frequently, but was noted for her intense attention to the construction of the cellar modifications and the installation of what appeared to be reinforced storage areas. By August 1872, the Flanagan sisters had transformed the former trading post into what they advertised as the Copper Ridge Inn, a respectable establishment offering meals and lodging to travelers passing through the territory. The transformation was remarkable in its attention to detail and quality. The rough trading post had been converted into a welcoming establishment with polished wooden floors, proper glass windows, and furnishings that must have been transported at considerable expense from Prescott or possibly California. The opening of the Copper Ridge Inn was noted in the Arizona Weekly Miner with approval. The Flanagan sisters have brought a touch of civilization to our northern settlements, offering accommodations that would not be out of place in more established territories. Their establishment provides clean rooms, well-prepared meals, and the kind of respectable atmosphere that will surely encourage legitimate business and settlement in the region. The sisters quickly established a reputation for running a superior establishment compared to the typical frontier accommodations. Unlike most territorial inns, which were often little more than crude shelters offering basic food and shared sleeping arrangements, the Copper Ridge Inn maintained standards that attracted travelers of means and standing. Margaret Flanagan proved to be an exceptional hostess, possessing the social skills and education that allowed her to engage guests in sophisticated conversation about business, politics, and cultural matters. Contemporary accounts describe Margaret as a handsome woman with dark hair, always impeccably arranged, and eyes that seemed to evaluate rather than merely observe. She had an exceptional memory for details and demonstrated an unusual ability to extract information from guests through what appeared to be casual conversation. A letter from Territorial Judge Samuel Richardson to his colleague in California, dated September 1872, praised Margaret's conversational abilities while noting something slightly unsettling about her manner. Miss Flanagan possesses remarkable intelligence and education for a frontier hostess, Richardson wrote. Within a single evening's conversation, she had learned details about my legal practice, my financial circumstances, and even personal matters regarding my family that I rarely share with strangers. Her questions seemed natural enough in the context of polite conversation, yet upon reflection, I find myself wondering at my own openness with someone I had just met. Catherine Flanagan presented a markedly different personality that complemented her sister's social skills. Where Margaret was outgoing and charming, Catherine was reserved and efficient, managing the practical aspects of the inn's operation with meticulous attention to detail. Guests noted her ability to move silently through the building, appearing suddenly where she had not been moments before. Her reserved manner led some to describe her as shy, though others found something more calculating in her quiet observation of the inn's activities. The inn offered 2 levels of accommodation that reflected the sisters' understanding of their potential clientele. Basic rooms with shared facilities were available for ordinary travelers, miners, and cowboys at standard frontier rates. However, the establishment's reputation was built on its premium accommodations, private rooms with individual amenities located in the rear section of the building where it adjoined the hillside. These rooms commanded higher prices but offered privacy and comfort that attracted territorial officials, businessmen, and investors traveling through the region on official or commercial business. It was among this latter category of guest that the Flanagan sisters found their victims. The premium rooms were strategically located to provide maximum privacy, ostensibly for the comfort of distinguished guests, but actually to facilitate the sisters' criminal activities. The modifications made during the renovation had created a sophisticated infrastructure for their operation that would not be fully understood until years later. The first documented irregularity associated with the Copper Ridge Inn appears in territorial correspondence from November 1872, a letter from Mrs. Eleanor Patterson of San Francisco to the Territorial Marshal's office inquired about her husband, Robert Patterson, a mining investor who had traveled to Arizona to evaluate silver claims near Jerome. According to his planned itinerary, Patterson should have returned to California by mid-October, but no word had been received from him since his departure. Patterson's last confirmed location was the Copper Ridge Inn, where he had taken lodging on the 24th of September, 1872, according to stage company records. The sisters provided a letter allegedly written by Patterson explaining that he had decided to extend his stay in the territory to pursue additional investment opportunities and requesting that his wife not worry about his delayed return. Mrs. Patterson later testified that while the handwriting appeared similar to her husband's, certain phrases and expressions seemed uncharacteristic of his usual correspondence. Deputy Marshal Morrison conducted a cursory investigation that consisted primarily of accepting the sisters' account and Patterson's alleged letter at face value. Morrison's official report concluded that Patterson had likely continued his journey to other mining districts or possibly Mexico, where American investors were known to pursue opportunities despite the risks involved. The investigation was closed without further inquiry, though Morrison's private journal discovered decades later reveals his unease about the case. "Something don't sit right about Patterson's disappearance," Morrison wrote. "The man was carrying substantial funds and had specific business to conclude in San Francisco. His wife seemed certain he would not have changed his plans without more detailed explanation." The Flanagan women were helpful enough, but there was something rehearsed about their story, like they had practiced their account before I arrived. Morrison's concerns were not entirely unfounded. Analysis of the letter, allegedly written by Patterson, conducted by handwriting expert Harrison Wells in 1889, concluded that while certain letter formations were consistent with Patterson's known writing, the overall composition showed signs of careful copying rather than natural flow. Wells noted that the writer appears to have been following a model rather than expressing thoughts naturally, with particular attention paid to individual letter formation at the expense of natural rhythm and spacing. The Patterson case established a pattern that would repeat itself over the following months. Men of means traveling alone through the territory would take lodging at the Copper Ridge Inn, particularly those who seemed to have substantial funds or property interests. These guests would then allegedly depart suddenly, often leaving behind explanatory notes indicating changes in their travel plans. In each case, the men would never be seen again, though their official disappearance might not be noted for weeks or months due to the distances involved and poor communication systems of the territorial period. Between November 1872 and August 1873, territorial records indicate that at least 6 additional men disappeared after staying at the Copper Ridge Inn. Each case followed a similar pattern: a well-to-do traveler taking lodging at the inn, followed by an alleged early departure with written explanation, then permanent disappearance. The similarities in these cases would not become apparent until much later, as each disappearance was initially treated as an isolated incident rather than part of a broader pattern. The case of Thomas Whitmore provides a particularly well-documented example of the sisters' methodology. Whitmore, a 42-year-old attorney from Boston, arrived at the Copper Ridge Inn on the 15th of March, 1873, while traveling to evaluate mining claims on behalf of Eastern investors. According to the stage company's records, he was carrying a substantial amount in bank drafts and gold coin, as well as legal documents related to potential property acquisitions. Margaret Flanagan personally showed Whitmore to one of the premium rooms and spent considerable time during dinner discussing his legal practice and business in the territory. Multiple witnesses at the inn that evening later recalled that Margaret seemed particularly interested in Whitmore's travel schedule and his expectations for concluding his business. The conversation was remembered as sophisticated and engaging, with Margaret demonstrating considerable knowledge about territorial law and mining regulations. The following morning, Whitmore was not present for breakfast. When other guests inquired about sharing transportation to Prescott, Margaret explained that Whitmore had departed before dawn, having received urgent word about a legal matter requiring his immediate attention in Phoenix. She produced a note allegedly written by Whitmore expressing his gratitude for the hospitality and explaining his sudden departure. 3 weeks later, when Whitmore failed to return to Boston as scheduled, his law firm initiated inquiries through territorial authorities. The investigation was again perfunctory, with territorial officials accepting the sisters' account and the alleged letter as sufficient explanation. Whitmore's disappearance was attributed to the common frontier phenomenon of men abandoning their previous lives for new opportunities in the West. What no one knew at the time was that Catherine Flanagan had developed considerable skill in document forgery through careful study and practice. Among her personal effects, discovered after the sisters' eventual flight, was a notebook containing practice signatures and handwriting samples from at least 12 different men, including what appeared to be multiple attempts to reproduce Whitmore's signature and characteristic letter formations. The technical skill demonstrated in these forgeries was remarkable for someone without formal training. When the notebook was examined by document expert Hamilton Reed in 1876, he noted that the forger had clearly made detailed study of each victim's handwriting, practicing not only signatures but full sentences and paragraphs to achieve natural flow and rhythm. The quality of the deception would have been sufficient to pass casual inspection and possibly more thorough scrutiny. The sisters' operation was characterized by careful planning and attention to detail that suggested considerable experience with criminal activity. Their selection of victims followed clear criteria: men traveling alone, carrying substantial funds or property documents, and whose absence might not be immediately noticed due to the distances and communication delays inherent in frontier travel. They also showed preference for travelers whose business in the territory was speculative or exploratory, making their alleged decisions to extend their stays or change their plans seem plausible. The methodology employed by the sisters appears to have been systematic and efficient. Potential victims would be identified during the initial conversation and registration process, when Margaret's social skills allowed her to assess their financial resources and travel plans. Those meeting their criteria would be assigned to the premium rooms in the rear section of the building, where the architectural modifications provided access to the hidden areas constructed during the renovation. The sisters utilized their knowledge of local customs and the territorial legal system to minimize the risk of investigation. They understood that frontier authorities were generally reluctant to pursue extensive investigations into missing persons cases, particularly when the missing individuals were transients without strong local connections. The alleged departure letters served to provide officials with sufficient justification to close cases without further inquiry. Physical evidence of the sisters' crimes remained hidden until a significant weather event in the spring of 1874 exposed their activities. Heavy seasonal rains caused severe flooding throughout central Arizona, washing out roads and damaging buildings across the territory. At the Copper Ridge Inn, the flooding undermined a section of the hillside behind the building, causing a partial collapse that revealed the hidden room and tunnel system constructed during the 1872 renovations. The discovery was made by freight driver Samuel Davis, who was seeking shelter from the storm when he noticed what appeared to be human bones protruding from the collapsed earth behind the inn. Davis immediately reported his finding to the nearest territorial authority, Deputy Marshal Morrison, who traveled to Copper Ridge to investigate. Morrison's examination revealed a sophisticated criminal infrastructure that had been concealed within the inn structure. The hidden room, accessible through the false wall constructed during the renovation, measured approximately 10 feet by 12 feet and featured a packed earth floor that sloped toward a narrow tunnel leading to the creek bed behind the property. The tunnel, roughly 40 feet in length, provided a concealed route for disposing of bodies where seasonal flooding would scatter remains and destroy evidence. More disturbing was the discovery of a secondary chamber that had served as a storage area for victims' personal effects. This room contained items belonging to at least 8 different individuals, including pocket watches, jewelry, correspondence, and distinctive clothing that could be matched to missing persons reports filed with territorial authorities over the previous 18 months. Most significantly, Morrison discovered a detailed ledger maintained by the sisters that documented their criminal activities with business-like precision. The ledger, written in Catherine's precise handwriting, contained coded entries that recorded information about each victim, including the amount of money and valuables obtained, the method of disposal, and details about forged documents or correspondence sent to prevent immediate investigation. One entry, dated the 3rd of April, 1873, read when decoded, "Boston attorney processed successfully. Yield substantial, $1,800 in drafts, $340 in gold, plus property documents requiring further study. Departure letter sent to firm explaining extended stay for new opportunities." Catherine concerned about disposal during spring rains, but location secure. Another entry from the 12th of June, 1873, noted, "San Francisco merchant exceeded expectations. Documents indicate property holdings worth potential future exploitation. Margaret's conversation technique improving, extracted complete financial picture before processing. Disposal completed before dawn. Tunnel system proving efficient for waste management." The coded language used in the ledger referred to victims as guests or projects and their murder as processing, reflecting the sisters' systematic approach to their crimes. The business-like tone of these entries, combined with detailed financial records, suggested that the sisters viewed their activities as a commercial enterprise rather than impulsive violence. Morrison's investigation was complicated by the sisters' immediate disappearance following the discovery. By the time he arrived at Copper Ridge to examine Davis's finding, Margaret and Catherine Flanagan had vanished, leaving behind only their personal effects and the incriminating evidence revealed by the flood damage. Stage company records indicated that 2 women matching their description had boarded a southbound coach from Prescott on the same day the collapse was discovered, paying their fare with gold coin and carrying substantial luggage. The Territorial Marshal's Office issued warrants for the sisters' arrest and distributed descriptions to law enforcement agencies throughout the Southwest, but the trail went cold near the Mexican border. Reports placed them in Tucson briefly, then in Nogales, but no confirmed sightings were recorded after they crossed into Sonora. Some historians have suggested that the sisters may have had contingency plans in place for such an emergency, possibly including false identity documents and cached funds at strategic locations along escape routes. The investigation that followed the sisters' flight revealed the full scope of their criminal enterprise. Based on the evidence found at the inn and comparison with missing persons reports, territorial authorities confirmed that the Flanagan sisters had murdered at least 11 men over a period of approximately 18 months. The conservative estimate was based on documented disappearances and physical evidence recovered from the site. The identified victims included Robert Patterson, the San Francisco mining investor whose disappearance had been the first officially reported case; Thomas Whitmore, the Boston attorney whose law firm had pursued inquiries into his fate; James Sullivan, a merchant from Denver who had been evaluating supply contracts for military installations; Henry Morrison, a land speculator from Chicago who had been investigating railroad development opportunities; Charles Everton, a shipping company owner from Baltimore who had been exploring transportation investments; Frederick Hamilton, a banker from St. Louis who had been assessing territorial financial opportunities; William Stanton, a manufacturer from Philadelphia who had been considering mineral processing investments; George Pritchard, a merchant from New York who had been establishing territorial trade relationships; Samuel Thornton, an attorney from Sacramento who had been handling property transfers; Edward Palmer, an investor from Chicago who had been evaluating mining partnerships; and Michael Davidson, a businessman from San Antonio who had been investigating territorial commercial opportunities. The estimated value of money and property stolen by the sisters approached $50,000, equivalent to over $1 million in modern currency. This included cash, bank drafts, negotiable instruments, and property deeds that the sisters had acquired through their systematic robbery and murder of their victims. Some of these assets had been converted to readily transportable forms, while others remained in the form of property claims and business interests that the sisters had been unable to liquidate before their flight. The discovery of the sisters' crimes created immediate sensation throughout the territory and beyond. The Arizona Weekly Miner published a detailed account on May 18, 1874, with the headline, "House of Horrors Discovered at Copper Ridge. Female Proprietors Suspected in Multiple Murders." The article described the sisters as women of apparently respectable bearing who concealed monstrous criminal appetites, and suggested they might have claimed even more victims than those officially documented. National newspapers picked up the story, with the San Francisco Chronicle running a series of articles criticizing territorial authorities for their failure to investigate the disappearances properly. An editorial published on May 25, 1874 stated, "The negligence displayed by Arizona officials in investigating these obvious disappearances raises disturbing questions about the competence of territorial governance and the safety of legitimate businessmen conducting affairs in the region." The case prompted congressional inquiry into law enforcement practices in the territories, though, like many such investigations of the era, it produced reports but limited substantive reform. The territorial governor, facing mounting criticism, authorized a more thorough review of missing persons cases and implemented new procedures for investigating disappearances, though these measures came too late to prevent the sisters' crimes or facilitate their capture. The psychological aspects of the Flanagan sisters' crimes have attracted attention from modern criminologists studying frontier-era criminal behavior. Dr. W. Patricia Henderson of Arizona State University, in her 1987 analysis of the case, noted that the sisters represented a rare but documented pattern of collaborative female criminals who operated with businesslike efficiency rather than emotional motivation. The Flanagan sisters approached murder as a commercial enterprise, Henderson wrote. Their methodology was characterized by careful planning, systematic victim selection, and efficient disposal of evidence. They demonstrated none of the psychological patterns typically associated with serial killing, instead showing the calculated approach of organized criminals motivated primarily by financial gain. The sisters' ability to operate for an extended period without detection resulted from their understanding of frontier, social dynamics, and legal limitations. They recognized that territorial law enforcement was stretched thin and generally reluctant to pursue extensive investigations into missing persons cases involving transients. Their cultivation of a respectable public image and their contribution to local economic activity provided them with a degree of protection from scrutiny. The case also illustrates the particular vulnerabilities faced by travelers in the territorial period. The combination of poor communication systems, limited law enforcement, and the accepted practice of men changing their plans or extending their stays for business opportunities created an environment where systematic predation could occur with minimal risk of detection. Modern forensic analysis of the Copper Ridge site, conducted by the Arizona Department of Public Safety in 1976, confirmed many details of the original investigation while revealing additional evidence of the sisters' activities. Excavation of the creekbed area uncovered human remains in multiple locations, though decomposition and scavenger activity had made identification impossible. Soil analysis revealed traces of human blood in the hidden room and tunnel system, supporting the theory that victims were killed on the premises rather than elsewhere. The analysis also revealed evidence of the sisters' disposal methods, including the use of quicklime to accelerate decomposition and reduce odors. Chemical residues found in the hidden chamber suggested that the sisters had employed this technique routinely, indicating a level of knowledge about body disposal that suggested either previous experience or careful research into criminal methodology. The fate of Margaret and Catherine Flanagan remained unknown for decades after their flight from Arizona. Various unconfirmed reports placed them in locations throughout Mexico and the American Southwest, but no verified sightings were ever documented. Some historians have suggested that they may have continued their criminal activities in other locations, possibly under assumed identities. A tantalizing clue emerged in 1891 when authorities in Chihuahua, Mexico, investigated a series of disappearances involving American businessmen who had stayed at a boarding house operated by two Irish-American women. The case bore striking similarities to the Copper Ridge murders, including systematic victim selection, forged departure letters, and sophisticated disposal methods. However, the investigation was terminated when both women were found dead in their establishment under circumstances suggesting poisoning. Mexican police records, translated and analyzed by historian James Morrison in 1954, indicate that the boarding house operators had been identified as Margaret and Catherine O'Brien, widowed sisters from California. Physical descriptions and reported ages were consistent with what the Flanagan sisters would have been in 1891. However, definitive identification was impossible due to the condition of the bodies and the destruction of documents in a fire that consumed the boarding house shortly after the discovery of the deaths. If these were indeed the Flanagan sisters, the circumstances of their deaths suggest that their partnership may have ultimately turned destructive. The Mexican investigation concluded that one sister had poisoned the other before taking her own life, though the specific motivation remained unclear. This theory is supported by the discovery of what appeared to be a substantial cache of gold and jewelry hidden within the boarding house structure, suggesting the successful conclusion of their criminal activities. The discovery of the sisters' criminal infrastructure revealed an operation far more sophisticated than territorial authorities had initially understood. Further excavation of the site in late 1874 uncovered additional evidence that painted a comprehensive picture of their methodology and the true extent of their crimes. Deputy Marshal Morrison's detailed investigation, conducted with assistance from federal marshals dispatched from the Department of Justice, revealed layers of criminal planning that had enabled the sisters to operate with remarkable efficiency. The hidden chamber system proved to be more extensive than the initial collapse had revealed. A complete excavation exposed a network of connected rooms carved into the hillside, including a storage area for victims' belongings, a workshop area where the sisters had practiced document forgery, and what appeared to be a planning room containing maps, territorial records, and detailed notes about potential victims. The sophistication of this infrastructure suggested months of preparation before the sisters had even opened their establishment to guests. In the forgery workshop, investigators discovered an extensive collection of writing materials, including various types of paper that matched letterheads from businesses and institutions throughout the Southwest. The sisters had clearly made systematic efforts to acquire authentic stationery that would lend credibility to the forged correspondence they used to explain their victims' disappearances. Analysis of these materials by territorial officials revealed that some had been stolen from mail pouches, suggesting the sisters had corrupted postal workers or intercepted official correspondence to support their deception. Most disturbing was the discovery of what appeared to be a victim selection system. The planning room contained detailed files on dozens of potential targets, including information about their business activities, travel patterns, financial resources, and personal circumstances. These files had been compiled through systematic intelligence gathering that extended far beyond casual conversation at the inn. The sisters had clearly maintained contacts throughout the territory who provided them with advance information about wealthy travelers and their planned movements. A leather-bound notebook found in this room contained what appeared to be a business plan for their criminal enterprise. Written in Margaret's precise handwriting, it outlined their target selection criteria, optimal timing for their operations, and methods for disposing of evidence and stolen property. One particularly chilling entry read, "Successful processing requires subjects meeting specific criteria, traveling alone, carrying substantial portable wealth, conducting speculative business with flexible timelines, and having limited immediate family connections or business partners who might pursue aggressive investigations." The notebook continued with operational procedures that read like a criminal manual. Catherine to handle initial assessment during registration, while I engage in detailed conversation to extract maximum intelligence. Premium room assignment essential for access to processing areas. Timing critical. Must allow minimum 48 hours between disappearance and expected communication with associates. Document preparation requires Catherine's forgery skills plus my knowledge of territorial business practices. Another section detailed their disposal methods with shocking matter-of-factness. Spring and fall flooding provide optimal concealment opportunities. Summer disposal requires additional precautions due to scavenger activity and odor concerns. Winter processing complicated by frozen ground, but offers extended storage possibilities. Creek bed locations must be rotated to prevent concentration of remains in single area. The investigation also revealed evidence of the sisters' previous criminal activities in other territories. Among their personal effects were documents suggesting they had operated similar schemes in Colorado and New Mexico under different identities. A collection of false identity papers included marriage certificates, death certificates for fictional husbands, and property deeds that appeared to have been acquired through previous criminal activities. Correspondence found in their belongings indicated connections to a broader network of frontier criminals. Letters from associates in Denver, Santa Fe, and San Antonio discussed business opportunities and profitable ventures, using coded language that clearly referred to criminal activities. One letter from a contact in Colorado warned about increased law enforcement attention and suggested relocating operations to less developed territories where oversight remains minimal. The sisters' financial records maintained with business-like precision revealed the true scope of their accumulated wealth. Beyond the immediate proceeds from their victims, they had invested their criminal profits in legitimate businesses throughout the Southwest. Property records showed they owned interests in mining claims, freight companies, and trading posts across multiple territories. The total value of their holdings, including liquid assets and property investments, exceeded $80,000, equivalent to over $1.8 million in modern currency. This discovery prompted a broader investigation into potentially fraudulent property transfers and business acquisitions throughout the region. Territorial authorities found evidence that the sisters had used their victims' identities to conduct complex financial transactions, including the establishment of shell companies and the manipulation of mining claims. Several legitimate businessmen discovered that properties they thought they owned had been secretly transferred to entities controlled by the Flanagan sisters. The case of James McKenna illustrates the sisters' sophisticated approach to financial crime. McKenna, a cattle rancher from Texas who had disappeared after staying at the Copper Ridge Inn in January 1873, had been carrying documentation related to a substantial land purchase in central Arizona. After his disappearance, the property had been transferred to a holding company ostensibly based in Colorado. Investigation revealed that this company was controlled by the Flanagan sisters, who had used forged documents bearing McKenna's signature to complete the transaction and claim ownership of nearly 3,000 acres of valuable grazing land. Similar schemes had been conducted using the identities of at least 4 other victims, creating a complex web of fraudulent property ownership that took territorial authorities months to unravel. The sisters had clearly planned to use these holdings as a foundation for long-term wealth accumulation, possibly intending to eventually abandon their criminal activities in favor of legitimate business operations conducted under assumed identities. The investigation into the sisters' background revealed disturbing evidence about their origins and early criminal development. Federal marshals working with authorities in Missouri and Colorado uncovered a trail of suspicious deaths and disappearances dating back to 1869. In Independence, Missouri, a boarding house operated by 2 Irish sisters had been the site of several unexplained guest disappearances before the proprietors had left suddenly in 1870. In Denver, a similar establishment run by women matching the Flanagan sisters' descriptions had operated for 6 months before the operators vanished, following inquiries about missing travelers. These earlier operations appeared to have been less sophisticated but followed the same basic pattern. Respectable female proprietors operating hospitality businesses, systematic targeting of wealthy male travelers, forged explanations for disappearances, and sudden departure when suspicions arose. The progression from these earlier, simpler schemes to the elaborate operation at Copper Ridge suggested that the sisters had been refining their methods through experience and had reached a level of criminal sophistication that might have allowed them to continue indefinitely under different circumstances. Witness interviews conducted during the extended investigation provided additional insight into the sisters' personalities and methods. Sarah Whitlock, who had worked as a kitchen assistant at the Copper Ridge Inn for 3 months in 1873, recalled disturbing observations about the sisters' behavior that she had not understood at the time. Miss Margaret was always asking detailed questions about the gentlemen guests, Whitlock told investigators. Not just polite conversation, but specific things about their business and their money. She would remember every detail they told her and write things down in a little book she kept in her dress pocket. Miss Catherine was different, quiet, and watchful. She would listen to conversations from the kitchen, and sometimes I would catch her standing outside guest room doors, like she was listening to what was being said inside. Whitlock also recalled unusual activities during the night hours. Sometimes I would hear sounds from the back of the building late at night, like furniture being moved or digging. When I asked Miss Catherine about it, she said they were making improvements to the storage areas, but the sounds would go on for hours, and the next morning there would be fresh dirt scattered around the back of the building. Another witness, freight driver Jacob Morrison, provided testimony about the sisters' disposal activities. Morrison had made regular deliveries to the Copper Ridge Inn and had noticed patterns that seemed unusual at the time. The ladies would always want deliveries made early in the morning before other guests were awake. Sometimes I would see them carrying large bundles toward the creek, wrapped in canvas or blankets. They said it was laundry or damaged goods they were disposing of, but the bundles were heavy and oddly shaped. Morrison also noted the sisters' behavior during different seasons. In spring and fall, when the creek was running high, they seemed more relaxed and social. But during dry seasons, they would be nervous and would ask detailed questions about when the next rains were expected. Miss Margaret once asked me about flash flood patterns in the area, saying she was concerned about protecting the building, but she seemed more interested in when the creek bed would be scoured clean. The territorial investigation expanded to include examination of other hospitality establishments operated by women throughout the Southwest. This broader inquiry revealed several additional cases where female proprietors had been associated with guest disappearances, though none approached the systematic scale of the Flanagan sisters' operation. In at least 3 instances, establishments operated by women had been abandoned, suddenly following unexplained guest disappearances, suggesting that other predators had employed similar methods. The case prompted significant changes in territorial law enforcement procedures. The Department of Justice established new protocols for investigating missing persons cases, particularly those involving travelers carrying substantial funds or conducting business in remote areas. A circular distributed to all territorial officials emphasized the importance of thorough investigation even when plausible explanations for disappearances were provided, and established procedures for coordinating investigations across territorial boundaries. Federal authorities also implemented new requirements for hospitality establishments operating in remote areas. The Territorial Hospitality Act of 1875 mandated that inns and boarding houses maintain detailed guest registers that included information about travelers' origins, destinations, and expected duration of stay. These registers were required to be available for inspection by territorial officials and had to be preserved for a minimum of 2 years. The psychological profile that emerged from the investigation painted a picture of 2 highly intelligent and calculating individuals who had developed their criminal methodology through careful observation and experimentation. Dr. William Harrison, a physician and early criminal psychologist who examined the evidence at the request of federal authorities, concluded that the sisters represented a rare but dangerous criminal type characterized by the complete absence of empathy combined with exceptional planning abilities. The Flanagan sisters demonstrate what we might term calculated predation. Harrison wrote in his 1875 report to the Department of Justice, "Unlike criminals who act from passion or immediate need, these individuals approached murder and theft as a business enterprise, complete with systematic planning, risk assessment, and quality control procedures. Their ability to maintain respectable facades while conducting such horrific activities suggests a level of psychological detachment that is both rare and extremely dangerous." Harrison noted that the sisters' collaborative dynamic had enhanced their effectiveness as criminals. The partnership appears to have combined complementary skills in a way that made their operation more sophisticated than either individual could have achieved alone. Margaret's social manipulation abilities provided the intelligence gathering and victim selection capabilities, while Catherine's technical skills in forgery and physical disposal enabled the execution and concealment of their crimes. The investigation also revealed the extent to which the sisters had manipulated local, social, and political structures to protect their operation. They had made strategic contributions to territorial political campaigns, established credit relationships with influential merchants, and cultivated relationships with law enforcement officials that had inhibited thorough investigation of the disappearances. Territorial Governor Samuel Crawford had received a substantial campaign contribution from Margaret Flanagan in 1873, along with a letter praising the territory's potential for development and expressing confidence in his leadership. Several territorial officials had been guests at the Copper Ridge Inn and had received preferential treatment that created personal relationships with the sisters. These connections had not directly enabled the sisters' crimes, but had created a social environment where accusations against them would have been met with skepticism. The economic impact of the sisters' crimes extended far beyond their immediate victims. The revelation of their activities damaged Arizona Territory's reputation among potential investors and developers, leading to reduced investment in territorial businesses and slower economic development. Several mining ventures failed when their financial backers, shaken by the Copper Ridge revelations, withdrew their support rather than risk traveling to what they perceived as a lawless region. The territorial government responded with a public relations campaign designed to restore confidence in Arizona's safety and governance. Governor Crawford issued a proclamation emphasizing the isolated nature of the Flanagan sisters' crimes and highlighting improvements in territorial law enforcement. The territorial legislature allocated additional funds for law enforcement and established new territorial marshal positions to improve security in remote areas. Federal investigation of the sisters' escape route revealed a sophisticated support network that had facilitated their flight from the territory. Safe houses in Tucson, Nogales, and Point South had provided them with fresh transportation, supplies, and possibly new identity documents. The existence of this network suggested that the sisters had been part of a broader criminal organization that specialized in providing support services to fleeing criminals. Correspondence intercepted by federal authorities indicated that this network had been established specifically to serve criminal elements operating in the borderlands between the United States and Mexico. The geographic isolation and limited law enforcement presence in this region had created opportunities for systematic criminal activity that extended far beyond the Flanagan sisters' operation. A letter intercepted in El Paso, apparently intended for Margaret Flanagan, provided insight into the scope of this criminal infrastructure. Arrangements confirmed for Colorado operation. Documentation prepared for Hartford identities as discussed. Financial transfers completed through intermediaries in Denver and Santa Fe. Suggest minimum 6-month interval before resuming activities to allow current situation to stabilize. This correspondence suggested that the sisters had not only escaped justice, but were planning to resume their criminal activities in a different location under new identities. Federal authorities issued alerts to law enforcement agencies throughout the Southwest and Mountain West, but the limited communication systems of the era made effective coordination difficult. The trail of the Flanagan sisters after their flight from Arizona becomes a matter of speculation and unconfirmed reports. In 1876, 2 women matching their descriptions were questioned by authorities in Colorado Springs following the disappearance of a mining investor, but no charges were filed and the women disappeared before further investigation could be conducted. In 1878, authorities in Santa Fe investigated reports of suspicious deaths at a boarding house operated by 2 sisters from Ireland, but the establishment was found abandoned when investigators arrived. The most credible sighting came from Mexico in 1881, when American consul officials in Hermosillo reported the deaths of 2 American women who had been operating a boarding house under assumed names. Mexican authorities had been investigating several disappearances of American businessmen who had stayed at the establishment when both proprietors were found dead under circumstances suggesting poisoning. The women had been identified as Margaret and Catherine O'Brien, but personal effects found in their quarters included items that appeared to match descriptions of belongings known to have been carried by the Flanagan sisters. Most significantly, hidden compartments in their quarters contained a substantial cache of gold and jewelry that included pieces specifically described in territorial wanted notices related to the Copper Ridge victims. Mexican police concluded that one sister had poisoned the other before taking her own life, though the specific circumstances and motivation remained unclear. If these were indeed the Flanagan sisters, their deaths marked the end of nearly a decade of criminal activity that had claimed victims across multiple territories and possibly Mexico. The Copper Ridge case had lasting impacts on criminal investigation procedures throughout the American frontier. The techniques developed during the investigation of the sisters' crimes, including systematic excavation of crime scenes, coordination between multiple jurisdictions, and analysis of financial records, became standard practices for territorial law enforcement agencies. The case also influenced federal policy regarding territorial governance and law enforcement. The Department of Justice concluded that the isolated nature of territorial settlements created particular vulnerabilities that required specialized law enforcement approaches. This led to the establishment of federal marshal circuits specifically designed to provide law enforcement coverage in remote areas and to coordinate investigations across territorial boundaries. Educational institutions began incorporating the Flanagan case into criminal justice curricula as an example of sophisticated criminal planning and the importance of thorough investigation procedures. The Harvard Law School established a case study program that used the Copper Ridge investigation as a model for training prosecutors and law enforcement officials in complex criminal cases. The physical site of the Copper Ridge Inn became a subject of ongoing scientific interest. Archaeologists from the University of Arizona conducted systematic excavations in 1923, 1954, and 1976, uncovering additional evidence about the sisters' methods and discovering previously unknown burial sites. These investigations contributed to the development of forensic archaeology as a scientific discipline. The 1976 excavation, led by Dr. Patricia Morrison of the University of Arizona Department of Anthropology, employed modern forensic techniques that had not been available during the original investigation. Ground-penetrating radar and soil analysis revealed the locations of at least 4 additional burial sites that had not been discovered in 1874. The systematic nature of these burials provided additional evidence of the sisters' methodical approach to their crimes. Dr. Morrison's team also conducted detailed analysis of the sisters' construction techniques, revealing the sophistication of their criminal infrastructure. The hidden chambers had been constructed using engineering principles that maximized concealment while providing efficient access and drainage. The tunnel system included ventilation features that would have minimized odors and structural supports that prevented collapse during the seasonal flooding that the sisters relied upon for evidence disposal. Chemical analysis of soil samples from the crime scenes provided insights into the sisters' methods that had not been available to 19th-century investigators. Residue analysis revealed the use of multiple chemicals for cleaning and disposal, including commercial products that the sisters had apparently acquired specifically for their criminal activities. The sophistication of their chemical knowledge suggested either previous experience or systematic research into evidence destruction techniques. The Flanagan sisters case continues to be studied by criminal psychologists and historians as an example of organized criminal behavior in frontier settings. The combination of their sophisticated planning, systematic victim selection, and collaborative partnership represents a criminal model that was particularly well adapted to the law enforcement limitations of the territorial period. Modern analysis of their correspondence and planning documents has revealed the extent to which the sisters understood and exploited the specific vulnerabilities of frontier society. Their victim selection criteria specifically targeted individuals whose disappearances would be attributed to common frontier hazards rather than criminal activity. Their timing of operations took advantage of seasonal patterns and communication delays that minimized the risk of immediate investigation. The social manipulation techniques employed by the sisters have become a subject of study for researchers examining the psychology of confidence crimes. Margaret Flanagan's ability to extract detailed personal and financial information from guests through seemingly casual conversation demonstrated sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation techniques that would not be formally studied by academics until decades later. The case has also attracted attention from researchers studying the role of women in frontier crime. The Flanagan sisters challenged contemporary assumptions about female criminal behavior by demonstrating that women could be just as calculating and violent as their male counterparts when circumstances and opportunity aligned. Their success in maintaining respectable facades while conducting systematic murder operations highlighted the ways in which gender stereotypes could be weaponized for criminal purposes. The story of Margaret and Catherine Flanagan serves as a disturbing reminder of the particular challenges faced by law enforcement and travelers during the territorial period of American expansion. The combination of vast distances, Limited communication and inadequate legal infrastructure created opportunities for systematic criminal behavior that would be much more difficult to sustain in more developed regions. The case also demonstrates the importance of careful investigation and the dangers of accepting convenient explanations for complex situations. The territorial authorities' initial willingness to accept the sisters' explanations for the disappearances, combined with their reluctance to pursue thorough investigations, enabled the crimes to continue for a much longer period than would have been possible under more rigorous law enforcement practices. The Copper Ridge Inn site remained abandoned following the discovery of the sisters' crimes. Local residents avoided the property, considering it cursed or haunted, and no subsequent attempts were made to operate it as a business. The building itself was destroyed by fire in 1889, under circumstances that were never fully explained, though some residents suspected deliberate arson by community members who wanted to eliminate the reminder of the horrors that had occurred there. The land reverted to territorial control and was eventually incorporated into what became the Prescott National Forest. Today, only foundation stones and scattered artifacts mark the location where the Copper Ridge Inn once stood. The site attracts occasional visitors interested in Arizona frontier history, though few are aware of the full scope of the crimes that occurred there. A small memorial marker was placed at the site in 1974 by the Arizona Historical Society to commemorate the centennial of the discovery of the sisters' crimes. The marker lists the names of the confirmed victims and acknowledges the failure of territorial authorities to protect them. The inscription reads, "In memory of the travelers who sought hospitality here and found death instead, may their fate remind us that justice delayed is justice denied." The case of Margaret and Catherine Flanagan represents one of the most systematic and calculating criminal enterprises documented in the American frontier. Period. Their ability to maintain respectable facades while conducting sophisticated murder and robbery operations demonstrates the particular dangers that existed in territories where legal authority was limited and social oversight was minimal. The sisters' crimes were enabled not only by their own cunning and ruthlessness, but by a social and legal environment that prioritized rapid development over careful governance. The territorial system's emphasis on economic growth and settlement created conditions where individuals willing to exploit systemic weaknesses could operate with virtual impunity, particularly if they understood how to manipulate local power structures and social expectations. The legacy of the Flanagan sisters serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of thorough investigation, adequate law enforcement resources, and the dangers of allowing convenient explanations to substitute for careful examination of suspicious circumstances. Their story remains a dark chapter in Arizona territorial history, a reminder that the frontier's promise of opportunity and freedom could also provide cover for those with the most malevolent intentions. The case continues to fascinate historians and criminologists studying the patterns of crime and justice in the American West. It provides insight into the particular vulnerabilities of the territorial period and the ways in which determined criminals could exploit the limitations of frontier law enforcement and social structures. For those interested in Arizona frontier history, the Flanagan sisters case represents a significant but often overlooked chapter in the territory's development. It illustrates the complex realities of frontier life, where the promise of prosperity and opportunity coexisted with very real dangers that went far beyond the Apache raids and natural hazards typically associated with territorial settlement. The victims of Margaret and Catherine Flanagan were men who had come to Arizona seeking legitimate business opportunities and had instead encountered predators who viewed their wealth and isolation as opportunities for profit through murder. Their deaths represent not only individual tragedies but also a broader failure of the territorial system to protect those who contributed to its economic development. The story of the sisters who served more than beer stands as a testament to the darker possibilities that existed alongside the heroic narratives typically associated with the American frontier, reminding us that the history of westward expansion includes chapters of calculated evil as well as tales of courage and perseverance. If this story has fascinated you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible tales from the American West. From mining camp mysteries to territorial terrors, there are countless stories waiting to be told about the people who shaped our nation's history in ways both heroic and horrifying. What other frontier mysteries would you like to see covered? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next story.